that species, while it's still classed as critically endangered, it's not teetering on the brink of extinction anymore.
You can get much more out of this project than just helping us find all the supermassive black holes.
I brought that scientific approach to understanding cities.
The ocean currents pretty much bring lots of rubbish to those areas.
Particle, proudly supported by SciTech.
Hello and welcome to the Particle Podcast. We've seen a lot of headlines focusing on the 2019 UN Climate Summit over the past few weeks, including Swedish teenager environment activist Greta Thunberg's passionate speech to spur on action from our world leaders. With school students becoming a driving force in the climate change conversation, some education institutes are also getting on board with the push for a cleaner and more sustainable future. But how do you measure a school's carbon footprint? Well, WA-based ClimateClever has been building a community of schools and local governments who are taking action on climate change through their data-driven program. Managing Director Vanessa Rawland and Chief Technology Officer Alexander Karan are with me today in the studio. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So, walk us through what ClimateClever is about.
So basically, we started off way back in 2012 when we helped us certify the first carbon neutral school in Australia. And since then, we've been on this mission to help more schools reduce their carbon footprint and take action on climate change, but also reduce their costs at the same time. So basically what we've got now, this is many years down the track, we've developed a very data-driven and evidence-based app that helps schools in a really engaging way to measure their carbon footprint, audit their school buildings and identify all the different things that are consuming energy, water and waste. And then the app provides them with a whole bunch of tips and ideas and recommendations on what they can do to reduce their carbon footprint.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of data in it. So we kind of like abstract that all away, it all happens in behind the scenes, and we've just sort of got this really nice, beautiful UI that sort of helps the schools, the students, the teachers, parents, anyone that wants to be involved really, just learn about what powers their school, what their building's made up with, and how that affects, not just their carbon footprint, but their utility spend as well.
Because that's also a big conversation around the cost of becoming more carbon neutral, but there's also an argument that it can be used to, actually save you money as well.
Absolutely. This is what we've just discovered over the past several years. We've done lots of pilots and research around this. And a lot of schools are just really inefficient, and they don't realise that they are. They might have far more appliances than they need, such as fridges, or they might be leaving appliances on over school holidays. We've discovered heaps of water leaks in schools, and just unfortunately sort of bad behaviour.
Yeah.
There's some things are actually technological, old inefficient appliances, but then other things are just people not realising that they could actually do things a bit better.
Okay, so what sort of reaction have you been getting from the schools that have got involved in the program? I understand there's been a few over the years who've obviously had a bit of a longer time for you guys to collect data.
Yeah, well, we get great feedback from the schools. I think it's really something that they've been looking for, particularly in the WA scene. There hasn't really been anything that's enabled to given them that strategic approach on what to do. I think they all get very very overwhelmed by it. We often get schools saying, we've got a worm farm. Should we do an LED lighting upgrade? And we're there sort of saying, well, one costs $150, the other one's $150,000, and there's some other things you could do to save money first, and then maybe use that money to spend on some of those upgrades. They usually get very excited by the opportunity for doing all those actions in a ordered and structured way.
I think it's more than that. They also learn a lot, and sometimes I think they do get a little overwhelmed. But I think because of the way we've built the app, it allows them to sort of learn in an easier trickle down sort of way. We talk to teachers every week, because a lot of the time is the teachers the driving force. And they'll call up and be like, I was going through my electricity bill or my water bill, and I didn't know we had 3 water meters at the school. I didn't even know this meter existed, I didn't even know we were paying for this meter, Or I think we had that case where one school was paying for more toilets or something than they actually had, So
for their sewage charges.
Yeah, so there's a fixture charge on the water bill, and all public schools pay that fixture charge. And one school, once they discovered that the teacher grabbed their students and said, right, kids, we're going to count the toilets today, and probably to the kids' dismay, and they did that, but they saved $4,000 on their water bill for that year, and then obviously going forward, because they would have been incorrectly charged probably for the last 20 years. And so there's just so many different things that they've discovered, which they do get very excited about.
Because that's what the tool does. It allows you to see all your data in a way that even if you had Excel sheets, you wouldn't be able to do, because there is just so much data. It's unbelievable. I mean, we've had a hell of a time trying to, create a system that abstracts that complexity away.
The other benefit, if I can jump in as well, is that comparison data, the ability for those schools to compare with each other, and that's really revealed a lot of things for schools, because if a school of a similar size compare each other and go, why is our water bill so much higher than yours, that can be the indication of, oh, well, maybe you've got a leak at your school or something.
Helps them find issues, or like if they've got similar size, same number of appliances, but my electricity bill's double, it's like, well, maybe my appliances need upgrading.
Or a tariff.
The ClimateClever interface for the schools lets them see what other schools are doing, see what recommendations I'm guessing there might be for their school.
Yeah, in a safe way though, like so they can't see who the school is, but it's all de-identified. But they can compare their bills, so their usage, consumption. They can compare audit data, so like appliances, size of buildings, and they can also compare like actions that they take and outcomes and stuff as well.
That's the really exciting part. So the app is based on 3 modules: measure, audit, and action. So the measure, as Alex said, that's where they feed in all the utility bills, and that calculates their carbon footprint and tracks their costs. The audit tool allows the kids to run around the whole school and count all the appliances. And then the action plan, it really is, it's like a peer learning platform. So every time a school enters an action, and it is our dream and aim that the kids are actually really driving that. So they're the ones managing the implementation of those actions. The app is collecting all that data, so every time they finish an action, it asks for a little completion report saying how much did that action cost, how easy was it to implement, were there any barriers, what advice and tips would you give others, and the app collects all that data, and we use machine learning and predictive analytics to say, yep, that was deemed a successful initiative, and that will go into the list of recommendations for other schools. So it's really, it uses predictive analytics and really
cool
evidence
stuff.
based. So the schools are always getting recommendations that we know that have worked well in other schools.
So like you could have 2 high schools of the same size, and one's done an LED upgrade and saw their power bill drop a load, and the other ones might be looking to find a way to save power, and that can be recommended to them through the app.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So so the app will actually look at where they're located as well and say, okay, and it will give quite specific recommendations. And so it's not going to give the same recommendations to a high school in Broome as it would to a primary school in Denmark.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we get to the point where the AI starts creating its own actions, that it can analyze all the data and be like, well, here's one I came up with. That's my little fantasy.
That'll be very useful that way, yeah.
Although it might be like I can see the first action now, get rid of all the students, no carbon footprint.
Close the school.
Oh dear. Now, the Department of Education has had a Sustainable Schools initiative in place for a few years now, which is meant to promote a similar idea of sustainability in schools. So how does ClimateClever fit into that picture of helping the schools, take that information and push it to the next level?
Okay, so Howard Flinders has been running that Sustainable Schools Network for a number of years, and he does an amazing job. He's basically created a network of different providers and so different programs that run things. So we know that there's the Department of or is it the Waste Authority run Wastewise schools, and then there's the Water Corp does Waterwise schools, and then there's Your Move from the Department of Transport. Interestingly, there's no energy run program, which is the biggest part of the carbon footprint and the most cost for the schools as well. So we've sort of come in to try and provide a bit of a umbrella program to say, here's, you can do all these things under our app, and ours is very data driven and quantitative. So because a lot of those other programs don't necessarily collect the data or require them to reduce, but they provide amazing curriculum materials for the students.
Such as recommendations of things you can do with the students to educate them.
Yeah, so they provide those curriculum resources, and they do provide recommendations, but it's not necessarily captured what they do. So that's where we sort of say, if you're part of Waterwise, that's fantastic. Put your actions in here, and then we can even feed that back to Water Corp as well.
Yeah, because then we can quantify the data as well. I mean, because the best thing that we really want to get to is to the point where you can be like, well, if I'm going to do this action, can you actually give me a rough idea of how I'm going to do? And so as we collect that data, we can get to that point. And that's why collecting it's important.
But we definitely partner with a lot of the different providers and suppliers in that Sustainable Schools Network, because everyone's doing really amazing things, and it is quite fantastic how many resources are there on offer for schools that are within that Sustainable Schools Network.
Yeah.
Now, this doesn't just apply to schools either, because I think you've done something with the City of Fremantle as well as part of it to look at a wider scope of how this can be used.
Well, it was actually the City of Fremantle that partnered with us in the very beginning when we launched our first Low Carbon Schools program. That was a 2-year program, and this has sort of been a succession of that pilot. Then we launched our app last year, which was another pilot. But yeah, the City of Fremantle initially partnered with us because they themselves were carbon neutral, and they had also a plan to help their community become carbon neutral. So because that was in their plan, they approached us and said, could you run a program for the schools in our local area? And that's really how we got up and running. And since then, we've actually partnered with lots of different local councils. So City of Melville came on board that year, and City of Coburn. We've had City of Cambridge, City of Leederville. The City of Stirling's just partnered with us in a large way this year, which is really exciting. We just had 8 schools join up.
Yeah, it was 8 schools that they subsidised. Yeah.
So the councils, I think, are really interested in the data because when they come on board and subsidise a local school, they then get access to the data from that school, so they can start to say, we've helped our local community reduce the school's carbon footprint by X amount of tonnes, or we've helped save this many costs. But the next thing that we're very excited about is we're about to launch the home version of the app, which means the students then learn about how to reduce the carbon footprint in the school, can then access the home version and go home and do the same process. So ask mum and dad for the utility bills, enter that in, do an audit of their house, and then create an action plan at home using the app's recommendations. And all that data is de-identified but linked back to the school, so the school can start to measure what impact it's had on its broader community. And we're really starting to see then the kids leading the change,
making the change.
So and we can measure that intergenerational influence, which we know happens and occurs.
Well, schools are definitely the best way of doing that. I mean, because going back to what the council does, like with the waste wise and stuff, my daughter brings that home from school. She's really passionate about it. She'll tell me off for doing stuff, she's like, we need to get a compost bin that doesn't go in this bin, and even I, who works for a company that's trying to help climate change, it's like she teaches me stuff on a daily basis. So
but we are seeing a lot of the younger generation kind of driving this conversation as well. I mean, we've seen the
climate strikes
the climate strikes that we've seen over the past week. We've seen people at the UN talking about it. We've seen kids providing stories which they're sending into newspapers and so on to talk about climate change and the impact it's having on them.
My daughter did the exact same thing. She persuaded the principal at her school to let her put stuff about climate change in the newsletter. She was like, in the weekly newsletter that goes out, we need to do a bit about climate change every week.
So you guys have been acknowledged for a Lotteries West grant, I believe, to help that program, to help bring it into the home and so on. Obviously, you've got the part with the schools. How do you go about getting families on board to help out?
So the Lottery West grant is probably slightly different from the school version, the home version, which is connected to the schools, because in order to answer that first question, it will be using the schools to say, hey schools, why don't you encourage your students to go home and use this? And we're really excited to have a master student come on board. Curtin University partnered with us on that and provided a scholarship, and she's actually going to be working with 3 private schools to develop up some curriculum, which is really testing how the schools can actually help to develop curriculum to make almost like homework for the students to go home and
so it's more than just an app. It's like, let's get it involved in the lessons. Let's do a lesson on our school.
And your home.
So go home, count how many PowerPoints you've left on, and so on like that.
Well, it's the same thing. Count all the appliances, everything. So it's really understanding the whole carbon footprint of the home and managing that home reduction and utility cost reduction, and then they can use all that data in the classroom for all sorts of activities.
Yeah.
It's very STEM focused. It's science, it's maths.
Well, it's behavioural change really when you get down to a lot of it, because we've never grown up with, you've never grown up being like, hey, you need to make sure you behave this way, turn those lights off, do this, that. It's just like, the light's on, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it's a definite change.
And we really do think that kids will help to create that change, because I think there's a lot of parents that want to do something but are so busy in their everyday lives. So we really do hope and expect that the kids will be the ones really leading that and saying, hey mum, we're going to do this, and hey dad, we've got it, can you change that? And
the power of kids to annoy,
And then in terms of the Lottery West grant, we're so excited. We won this grant around May, and it's with a bunch of social service organisations. So it's led by Rise Network, but there's Mercy Care, Uniting Care West, Access Housing, Foundation Housing, Community Housing Limited. So they all partnered with us to develop up specifically the home version, but specifically for the clients that they work with. So it might be lower income households, those in financial hardship and experiencing other issues. So we'll probably have maybe less focus on the climate aspect and more focus on the affordability. So really helping these households to reduce the utility costs. And as a side benefit, there's the environmental impact as well.
Just sort of help them get off that spiral, when you end up in a sort of low point in your life or a bit of misfortune, the idea is that we can work with the organisations to sort of capture them and help them, get a bit more money back in their pocket and get themselves back up and running again.
So because if you're wasting electricity, it's only going to make it harder for you to get out of that slump.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we're very grateful to Laurie West for their generous support, because that has meant that those clients and those people in those situations will have access to the app for free. Forever.
That's fantastic.
Really exciting.
So anybody who's part of those social service organisations in WA, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for coming in, and we look
you.
forward to hearing more about it.
Thanks, Carl.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
That was Vanessa Rowland and Alexander Karan from ClimateClever. The Particle Podcast is powered by SciTech. To find more stories focusing on WA innovation and STEM research, head to particle.scitech.org.au or search for Particle WA on Facebook. We hope you can join us next time.